Good evening, everyone. Chris Profi, Musically Obsessed. First off, I want to thank Emma over at 8 Vinyl Low. Can you hear it in the background? Yes, folks. Cheap Trick, Dream Police. I tell you what, I am very late to the Cheap Trick party. I had Live at Budokan for the longest time, and I listened to it, I enjoyed it, but this is my first proper studio album by Cheap Trick, and I tell you what, Emma, I am digging this. It sounds so funny to be talking about Cheap Trick like they're a new band for me, but they really are. I remember growing up in the 80s loving the song The Flame, and that's what that was called, right? But I never really listened to their early stuff, and I tell you what, this album kicks ass. So thank you, Emma, for putting that in my head to finally jump on the Cheap Trick train. Jump on the Cheap Trick train. All right, folks, I promise I am not high right now. I want to talk about a band that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. They are a punk band, but they are so much more than a punk band. The band is called Saccharine Trust. And they were formed in 1980 in LA, and they were part of the famous SST record label that I have talked about before, home of Black Flag, home of Husker Du, home of the Minutemen, home of Sonic Youth, and home to Saccharine Trust. You might not have ever heard of Saccharine Trust. So that's why I figured I'd show you what I have, talk to you a little bit about them, and maybe turn a few people on. So, their first album was actually an EP called Pagan Icons. And this came out in 1981. This happens to be a reissue of the album. But it still sounds awesome. Here's the back cover. You have Jack Brewer on vocals, Joe Baiza on guitar, and something I did not know, because I was looking this up. Rob Holtzman played drums on this album. He left after this album and he joined the band Slovenly, who I've talked about Slovenly before as well. So kind of a cool little SST tidbit for you out there. Saccharine Trust, their first EP, Pagan Icons. Awesome. If you like just straight ahead punk, but sort of like with a weird vibe, you're gonna really dig this album. Jack Brewer has very, very unique vocals, but they're so cool. And I can't think of a better album cover to match the music that's on this album. Definitely check out Pagan Icons. Awesome album. Now, here's the thing with Saccharine Trust though. Every album was a little bit different. So from Pagan Icons, which was like pretty much straight punk with like sort of a weird element to it, shorter songs, they came out with an album in 1984 called Surviving You Always. And I believe that that is a photo of a woman who jumped out of a building and she landed on a car, and that's her actual photo of her, I believe. Here's what the vinyl looks like. This is actually an original pressing of this album. I like this album better than Pagan Icons. I think it's a little bit more realized, a little bit more streamlined. They also started to bring in a little bit of that jazz element as well. Very, very cool album. This is actually kind of hard to get now. So I'm glad I actually have a copy of it. Saccharine Trust, Surviving You Always, came out in 1984. So very much similar to Pagan Icons, just a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more realized. Very cool stuff. All right, now, Saccharine Trust starts to evolve a little bit and become even more interesting of a band. In 1985, they came out with an album called World Broken. And what is so cool about this album, it was recorded live in one night, fully improvised. And Mike Watt from the Minutemen played bass on the album, which is so cool. Jack Brewer did spoken word poems over jazzy instrumentals. So they started to morph from just like a straight ahead punk band into this sort of jazzy beat poetry, sort of just sit back, smoke a cigar, and listen to it type band. It's so much different. Like if you listen to their first EP, Pagan Icons, it sounds nothing like this. This is so cool. If you like Captain Beefheart, if you like Zappa, if you like, you know, sort of instrumental, crazy, improvised jazz with like weirdness put into it, you're gonna dig this album. Very, very cool. Spoken word over cool little jazz. I'm just listening to Cheap Trick in the back. Thank you, Emma. Cheap Trick is awesome. All right, next. In 1986, Saccharine Trust came out with an album called We Became Snakes. This continues with the jazzy vibe that World Broken started, but this is of course a studio album. Again, a little bit more realized than World Broken. There are some actual jazz instrumentals on this album, some spoken word, just kind of continuing what they started with World Broken, but making it a little bit more realized. I can't say enough about this band. Again, if you are into jazz, and I'm thinking of Bill over at the Vinylverse, you might dig these guys. Anybody who's into sort of avant-garde jazz, you dig these guys. So We Became Snakes, 1986. Now, I'm giving you even more Saccharine Trust here. SST had a compilation that came out, I believe, yeah, it came out on vinyl and cassette, called The Blasting Concept. And this was all unreleased stuff. So Saccharine Trust did a song on here called Emotions and Anatomy. So that did not appear on any album, but it did appear on this cassette called The Blasting Concept. And this came out in 1986. So, you know, some very, very cool other bands on here as well, but Saccharine Trust has a song on there. They also came out with an album in '89 called Past Lives, which I don't have. Some unreleased live stuff by Saccharine Trust. And then, if you really like Saccharine Trust, Joe Baiza, the guitar player, went on to form a band called Universal Congress of. That's right, they're called Universal Congress of. And they even got more into the jazz. So just a very, very cool band. You don't hear a lot about Saccharine Trust. On the SST label, you know, they were never as huge as Black Flag or Husker Du or the Minutemen, but they should have been. Saccharine Trust was awesome. I think one of the band members described them as the black sheep on the roster, and that's a good term for them. But they're so awesome. So hopefully I turned you guys on to Saccharine Trust. Definitely check them out, and enjoy the rest of your, wait, what is today? Today Monday? Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Listen to music.